Hello and welcome to Opera Road Trip, OperaVision's 2-year podcast series exploring opera from its 16th century Italian roots to its role today across Europe and beyond. My name is Sebastian Schwarz, I'm an opera manager, and today I will be taking you to Ukraine. My guests today are Anna Gadetzka, co-director of Open Opera Ukraine, Galyna Grygorenko, Deputy Minister of Culture of Ukraine, Bogdan Strutynsky, Director of the National Operetta of Ukraine in Kyiv, and Vasyl Vovkun, Director of the Lviv Opera House. Before we get into some Ukrainian early music, let's start with a little bit of statistics that may help us put things better into perspective. Ukraine is the largest country entirely within European borders and roughly twice the size of Italy, 7 times bigger than Austria, and 20 times the size of Belgium. Before the war, its population was about 41 million. Today, due to wartime displacements, it's closer to 35 million, giving a population density of around 60 people per square kilometer, about half of France's and about a quarter of that of Germany. There are 6 major opera companies, 2 in Kyiv and 1 each in Lviv, Odessa, Kharkiv and Dnipro, and they offer roughly 8,000 seats altogether. These houses represent a rich and fairly diverse repertoire from classical masterpieces to contemporary works, increasingly reflecting Ukraine's long musical tradition, innovation and artistic creativity. But let's begin with music before we get ourselves a historical overview over Ukrainian opera and then bring in our guests. This is an excerpt from Bortniansky's Alcide from 1778, first performed in Venice, conducted by Oksana Liniv with the Lviv Opera Orchestra. Born at the crossroads of Eastern and Western traditions, opera in Ukraine emerged not merely from courtly entertainment, but from a profound culture of choral singing, sacred music, and oral folk traditions. In the Baroque era, when Italian opera was sweeping across Europe, Ukrainian composers were drawn to its expressive possibilities. 18th century composers Maxim Berezovsky, Dmytro Bortniansky, and Artem Vedel studied the Italian operatic style. Berezovsky and Bortniansky trained directly in Italy, while Vedel, entirely Ukrainian-born and trained, developed his artistry at home. Their works blended Italian forms with the modal richness and intricate harmonies of Ukrainian sacred and folk music, creating a distinctive hybrid voice that hinted at what a truly Ukrainian opera tradition might have become. But this early promise unfolded under the tightening grip of empire. Beginning in the late 18th century, the Russian imperial authorities pursued a systematic campaign to erase Ukrainian language and culture. Catherine the Great, while a patron of the arts, centralized artistic life in St. Petersburg and Moscow. By the mid-19th century, this cultural suppression became explicit. The Valle circular from 1863 forbade the publication of most Ukrainian language books, declaring that, quote, "there never has been is not and never can be a separate Ukrainian language." End of quote. It was followed by the Ems Ukaz of 1876, signed by Tsar Alexander II, which banned public performances, plays, and even song lyrics in Ukrainian altogether. These decrees did not merely stifle artistic production, they disrupted the transmission of memory itself. Over generations, even Ukrainians came to internalize the imperial narrative, forgetting that their ancestors had created an operatic and cultural tradition distinct from Russia's. In the 19th century, when European nations were using opera to forge civic identity and articulate nationalist ideas, Ukraine's major theaters in Kyiv, Odessa, and Kharkiv were folded into the Russian imperial network. Their stages were dominated by works from Moscow and St. Petersburg, Glinka, Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov. Yet some voices fought to reclaim Ukrainian stories. Mykola Lysenko, from 1842 to 1912, often called the father of Ukrainian classical music, collected and arranged folk songs and wrote operas rooted in Ukrainian literature and history, including his masterpiece Taras Bulba. His vision was revolutionary: to place the Ukrainian language and experience at the heart of a grand operatic tradition. But he faced relentless censorship. His works were frequently banned, forced to be sung in Russian, or relegated to private salons. The 20th century brought revolution, world wars, and another empire. Under Soviet rule, Ukrainian opera houses were lavishly funded and permanent ensembles were established in Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa, and beyond. New operas were commissioned and celebrated, but only if they adhered to Soviet ideology. Folklore was sanitized, rewritten to glorify the collective, while works deemed nationalist or formalist were suppressed. Composers like Boris Lyatoshinsky, 1895 to 1968, created music of profound beauty and psychological depth, yet they were forced to navigate the perilous boundary between personal expression and political dogma. Many works were rewritten or silenced entirely. Opera houses became impressive monuments, but the narratives they staged were shaped by Moscow's lens, not Ukraine's authentic voice. When Ukraine finally gained independence in 1991, it inherited a paradox. Theaters and ensembles were strong, but their repertoire, institutional memory, and even their sense of artistic identity had been shaped by centuries of first imperial and then Soviet narratives. Just like the Russian people has never experienced democracy, Ukrainians had not known Ukrainian music, literature, or art for generations. For the first time in modern history, there was freedom to perform in Ukrainian without censorship, to revive suppressed works, and to tell stories drawn from Ukraine's own past. Yet generations of erasure had left gaps, so profound that even many Ukrainians had to rediscover their own cultural heritage through research, archival work, and education. What had been lost or forgotten now had to be actively reconstructed. As a result, opera in Ukraine today is not merely a performance tradition, but a process of self-definition, a way of asking, who are we and how do we want to be seen by the world? This challenge has become particularly urgent since the full-scale Russian invasion of 2022. Ukrainian artists and institutions have issued heartfelt appeals to their international colleagues to stop performing Russian works and hiring Russian artists, to reject the culture of the aggressor. These requests are deeply understandable, born of trauma and a desire for solidarity, yet they also reveal a painful dilemma. The West will not, nor should it simply erase Russian repertoire, rather present it in the correct historical context and freed from ideology. And what is that Ukrainian repertoire that represents the country's very own artistic voice and heritage, that it should, in the long term, join the canon of the great and the good, not instead of, but alongside all the other national schools? Opera in Ukraine today exists on two intertwined fronts. At home, performances take place under air raid sirens, musicians volunteer at the front or in hospitals, and productions become symbols of resilience. Abroad, Ukrainian artists fight to have their works heard, to claim space in the international repertory, and to replace centuries of imperial narratives with their own voices. 3 centuries after Berezovsky studied in Italy, Ukrainian opera is again in dialogue with Europe and the world, but this time on its own terms. What began as a hybrid art form shaped by outside forces has become a cultural act of survival, a declaration that Ukraine's stories, languages, and histories will no longer be erased. My first guest is Anna Gadetzka, a musicologist and curator and the co-founder and program director of Open Opera Ukraine, a small but ambitious initiative working largely outside the mainstream opera system. Her projects often involve amateur performers, new audiences and unusual venues. Anna, can you tell us a little bit about your path and what led you to start Open Opera Ukraine?
Дуже рада бачити тебе, Себастьяну, в Києві.
I'm very glad to see you here in Kyiv, Sebastian. It's important that people from other European countries come and see what Ukraine has been defending all these years, and also discover our culture, which has often remained invisible because of Russia's colonial dominance. My path began in Kyiv through an educational platform called Cultural Project. We organized public courses about music and eventually about opera. In 2015, with a grant and a partnership from a British theatre group, we staged a Baroque opera. This was the start of Open Opera Ukraine. 2 years later, we officially founded the organization. From the beginning, we focused on early music and Baroque opera, which is almost absent from Ukraine's repertoire due to Soviet-era neglect and lack of resources. There were no formal programs here, so musicians had to learn through master classes and international contacts. By 2017, we had gathered a professional Baroque orchestra and singers who were eager to explore this music. Even Emma Kirkby came to Kyiv to coach them. It was a turning point for us. We also wanted to bring opera beyond traditional theaters. Ukraine has only a handful of opera houses, so we looked for alternative venues, places full of potential to connect communities with music. In 2018, we created a Baroque amateur choir, the only one of its kind in Ukraine. It grew into a real community, showing how amateur music making can both build performers and audiences, and that opera and choral music can be accessible, joyful, and relevant.
Тому що там це і є головна мотивація.
Do you see Open Opera Ukraine as a critique of the system or as a space for something completely different to grow?
Я думаю, що це
That's a great question. Our goal has always been to create an alternative space based on trust, collaboration, and shared responsibility rather than top-down structures. Of course, this sometimes looks like criticism, especially when we show how much more could be done with the resources that national opera houses have. Our project-based model gives us freedom and flexibility. Independent organizations like ours can be quicker alternatives where institutional change is slow. That became especially important when the full-scale invasion began in 2022. At first, we were paralyzed. No one could even listen to music. But by spring, initiatives started again, and we realized how essential it was to support our own people, especially around the question of identity, as well as representing Ukraine abroad. One of our recent projects was Aeneids of the World, which combined European musical interpretations of Virgil's story with Lysenko's Ukrainian Aeneid, exploring themes of colonialism and cultural identity. Another was King Arthur, staged as a story about defending one's land for love and peace rather than for power. Today, I see opera as a way to process our inner struggles or collective trauma, while at the same time telling the world about our culture and its many connections. It requires curatorial, managerial, and artistic skills, but I believe it's a very fruitful path.
Але певно, що це дуже плідний шлях.
How does the mainstream opera world in Ukraine view initiatives like yours, and has the war changed the support you're receiving?
Мені би хотілося думати,
I think our influence is growing. When opera houses decide to perform early music, they often come to us for advice. Big institutions don't always take us fully seriously. We have no venue, no permanent staff, and we raise every bit of funding ourselves. But there's a growing respect. We even consulted for Odessa Opera. It's not about competition, but about offering new tools and approaches. As for the support, there are now more international grants available, and there is a growing interest in Ukraine that wants to know more than the daily statistics of the war. Open Opera Ukraine is a member of Opera Europa, which has brought us exciting proposals and contacts from across Europe.
контакти, які вже йдуть з Європи.
Your focus has been on Baroque music, including Ukrainian Baroque. How does that fit into your mission?
Ми від початку хотіли
Yes, from the start we wanted to focus on Ukrainian early music, though that comes with many challenges. Much of this heritage was invisible during the Soviet era, and even renowned musicologists gained access to archives only after independence, after 1991. In 2019, we founded the Sacred Music Lab Ukraine to research and perform early Ukrainian polyphony and secular works like those of Berezovsky. Presenting this repertoire helps Ukrainians reconnect with their own culture, and it allows the world to hear a part of European musical history that has long been overlooked. International audiences are often surprised by how rich and beautiful it is, and how structurally this music is so similar to Monteverdi or Schütz.
Генріха Шюца.
In your view, what must be done to improve international knowledge of Ukrainian opera and composers?
Перше, ми маємо дуже гарно працювати.
First, we need to work closely with our own archives, libraries, and music publishers. There is the early music, but even Soviet-era Ukrainian operas are a part of our heritage, and publishing them with modern standards, transliterations, and translations will make them accessible and interesting both at home and abroad. Second, international collaborations can boost Ukraine's visibility, bringing foreign conductors, directors, or dramaturgs here, and commissioning Ukrainian composers and artists for world theaters. It's also vital to critically reflect on the legacy of Russian music and opera. Ukrainians, with their deep understanding of this culture, can offer unique insights. This reflection is essential for both the local and the global cultural understanding because Russian opera carries ideological narratives that must be examined, just as Wagner has been critically addressed worldwide.
Так само, як він стався з Вагнером.
Looking ahead, what changes would you like to see in Ukrainian opera over the next years?
Мені би хотілося, щоб
First, we need peace. Only then can we rebuild properly. In the next years, I hope to see Ukrainian opera become more flexible, collaborative, and internationally connected, with strong audience engagement, including family-focused initiatives. Repertoire should expand to include both early works and experimental and contemporary productions. We need state funding for young artists through residency programs that create real career opportunities beyond the academy. And the state should also facilitate a long overdue leadership renewal at the National Opera to align with international standards and enable transformative change. For international audiences, I'd say, come visit. OperaVision streams many Ukrainian productions, and live performances are happening here despite the war. Supporting Ukrainian opera means engaging with both the music and the people who bring it to life. I can say that since the full-scale invasion, Ukraine's cultural life has become more intense and deeply meaningful. The energy in the arts now is extraordinary. It's about preserving life itself, and that makes everything feel alive.
сенсі про збереження життя та бажання жити. І тому тут це дуже живе.
Thank you, Anna Gadetzka, for offering this grassroots, independent perspective on the role opera can play today in the Ukraine and beyond. I'm grateful to my colleagues at Kyiv's leading drama theatre, the Ivan Franko Theatre, for letting me share a musical number from their hugely successful production of The Witch of Konotop. In Kyiv, audiences wait months for tickets, and the show has become a powerful cultural ambassador, recently touring to Amsterdam, Hamburg, Stockholm, Prague, and Berlin, with upcoming dates in London, the US, and Canada. Unlike most Ukrainian opera houses, which are still struggling to fully reclaim their own heritage, the Franko Theatre has drawn deeply on Ukrainian tradition for this production. Chorus master Susanna Karpenko revived the distinctive sound of Ukrainian folk singing. The three-part women's choruses with their bright, open tones, minimal vibrato, and a resonant chest voice that carries across open spaces, creating shimmering, often dissonant harmonies, unlike any Western choral music. The piece you're about to hear, Rozhenka, has been arranged for modern audiences, yet its unmistakable Ukrainian spirit shines through.
Чом ти, роженько, в городі одна, роже, роже, червона я, борова я, а я не одна, а я не сама. М'ята, роже, роже, червона я, борова я, хрещен барвіно, пахуч Васильок, роже, роже, червона я, борова я. Чом ти, дівонько, батенька одна, роже, роже, червона я, борова я.
From 2007 to 2010, my next guest served as Minister of Culture of Ukraine. Vasyl Vovkun, considering that unique perspective, how would you assess the state's current relationship with culture? What has changed and what still needs to change?
Unfortunately, the leaders of our state have never fully grasped, and still do not, the immense role of culture and cultural leaders in modern nation building. Puppet-like so-called political elites can never replace cultural leaders. In such circumstances, cultural processes cannot be properly led or formalized. Today, more than ever, we need a strategic opposition to the Russian world to defend our identity and restore historical justice. My experience as minister showed me that a ministry is only a mirage if it is funded as an afterthought and if its offices are not staffed by professional managers. That's why I support independent cultural institutions that can survive on their own and be competitive in domestic and international markets.
Since 2017, you are the director of the Lviv National Opera, which is now regarded as the most visible Ukrainian opera theatre on the international stage. In your view, what has contributed to this? Artistic choices, location, management strategy, or something else?
Відповідь на дане питання почну з вашої цікаво підміченої дефінації.
Let me begin with your very perceptive observation about geography. During the war, Lviv has suffered fewer bombings, less destruction than the east, south, or center of Ukraine, and foreign artists have had the courage to come and work here. But we see the war changing, and cheap drones can easily reach far into our country, and now even into Europe. So this geographic advantage may no longer be a reality. Before the war, Lviv Opera was generally seen as secondary or peripheral compared to the National Opera in Kyiv. Today, It is considered the foremost Ukrainian musical theater internationally. The key to that recognition is the creative program Ukrainian Breakthrough, with which I won the national competition to become general director here in 2017. But also the team, our management strategy, marketing, artistic policy, and the competitive selection of professional talent. And then, Sebastian, you asked whether it's also something else. That something else is, in fact, the war. It has made us tougher, more responsible, more honest and more truthful, deeper in spirit, more professional and self-aware. It forced us to understand what it is that we are defending. Thanks to the tireless work of the Ukrainian armed forces, we are able to live and contribute to the victory in the only way we can, by creating.
Можливість жити і творити.
What place does Ukrainian repertoire have today? Which stories, composers, and names do you think deserve international recognition right now?
Я переконаний, що української класичної опери, яка
This is a complex question. I'm convinced that a cohesive Ukrainian operatic tradition, one recognized across Europe, doesn't yet exist because of this gap you have explained earlier. There are, however, several composers and 20th century operas that could be of interest to European stages, most notably The Golden Ring by Vasyl Vovkun, which we rediscovered in 2020 for the 130th anniversary of the composer's birth. At the Lviv Opera, we addressed this gap on the one hand by rediscovering our own early music composers. In September 21, for example, we rediscovered the Baroque operas The Falcon and Alcide by Dmytro Bortnyansky and staged them for the first time in our theater's history. On the other hand, we commissioned new operas and ballets from contemporary Ukrainian composers, like Yevhen Stankovich's Terrible Revenge from 2022, which later got even shortlisted for Best World Premiere alongside companies like the Metropolitan Opera, Dutch National Opera, or the Liceu in Barcelona. Currently, Yevhen Stankovich, Victoria Poleva, Yuri Lanyuk, Ivan Nebesly, and Alexander Rodin are writing for the Lviv Opera and other Ukrainian theaters.
Іван Небесний, Олександр Родін.
In our conversations, you told me how you watched your audience change over the past 3 years. Would you care to tell our listeners?
До пандемії та до початку російської війни проти України
Before the pandemic and the start of Russia's full-scale war, the Lviv Opera's audience resembled those in European houses. You could hear conversations not only in Ukrainian, but also in English, German, Austrian, French, and Polish. The one major difference was age. Our audience is much younger and far more active in their emotional responses. During the war, the Lviv Opera was the first to reopen on April 1st, 2022, just over a month after the invasion began. Our new audience consisted largely of displaced people from the east, south, and central Ukraine. It was a special, deeply affected public, lost, frightened, closed off. I believe many of them came to the theater seeking psychological and emotional healing. Art, in some ways, replaced therapy. Soon, other theaters across Ukraine reopened, launching a second front, a cultural front. New dramaturgy emerged, new premieres, the new generation of directors, scenographers, and composers. Most importantly, audiences came back in force. Yes, this is cultural self-identification. It is not an escape. Rather, it is resistance, a space for believing in Ukraine's just victory. Because, unlike our neighbor in the east, all we really want is peace, to live in peace and unity with the global community.
разом із світовим співтовариством.
In October, the Lviv National Opera is celebrating its 125th anniversary. What does this historic moment mean to you?
125 років тому, 4 жовтня
On October 4th, 1900, the Lviv City Theatre of Opera and Ballet opened its doors and quickly earned a European reputation. We will celebrate the anniversary with an international conference called Musical Theatres of Ukraine During Wartime. There will be a Balla concert and performances of Poulenc's The Anope de Cavananite and The Golden Ring by Boris Strutynsky, and we are looking forward to welcome important guests not only from Ukraine, but also from European opera houses. Anniversaries are an opportunity to reflect together on the past and future of the theatre, and above all, to feel the pulse of the present day, which is tense and uncertain due to the challenges we face. The war has changed us all, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically, but we endure, and in the end, this war will have made us stronger and more aware of our Ukrainian heritage and values. This inspires me, and it brings immense energy and satisfaction.
Приносить величезну енергію та задоволення.
Thank you, Vasyl, and happy 125th birthday to your beautiful theatre. This rediscovery of Strutynsky's Zoloty Obruch, referred to by Vasyl as the Golden Ring, will be familiar to OperaVision viewers under the name of the Golden Crown, also often translated as the Golden Hoop or Circlet. I guess it is one of those cases where we are best off using the original name, as we do with so many other operas. So, let's listen to an excerpt from Lviv's rediscovery of Strutynsky's Zoloty Obruch.
Максим! Так гляньте, що ж на мене, чи сором загубили ви? Тьфу! Що діється з тобою, мій гордий Меркуди? Не Меркуди, а тепер, не велик я татарський, а краще б я загинув. І от ти мусиш жити. Навіщо? Щоб ці кайдані волочі. Я визволю тебе, Максиме. Ти хіба сама ти не рабиня у таборі цьому? О, не ганьби мене, кохана. Я батька не могла покинуть. Тепер же я за сором своїх батьків життям готова замати. Пізно, Мирославо. Ще не пізно, друже мій, дивись сюди, цей перстень золотий Сатурн подарував мені. Це знак безпечного проходу. Візьми його і тікай на волю. А ти? Але ж вони дізнаються, хто випустив мене на волю.
Just before taking my train back to Vienna on one of my recent trips to Kyiv, I sat down with Galyna Grygorenko in a street-side cafe to talk about the role of culture during wartime, how it contributes to resilience in national security, and how Ukraine continues to create and share its art with the world. I began by asking Galyna how she sees Ukraine's place in Europe and why cultural exchange remains vital, even now, while the war is ongoing.
That's important for us, to have this space to allow our artists to continue their artistic expression, to be presented on different international festivals, biennials, book fairs, just to be known and co-create together. I think that's the only recipe for building this trust and mutual understanding, because anyway, someday we will be members of the European Union. We are part of European family of countries, but officially members of European Union, someday it will come. And it's better to start working together beforehand to get used to this mechanism and to procedures and bureaucracy, etc., which is good, I believe. I truly believe that it's good because it's preventing some mistakes. And we need to think about culture as a way of investing into resilience of our European nations, many people who live here in Europe. So that's very important. I know that Commissioner Glenn Mikulev has launched this initiative about Culture Compass, how to strengthen the cultural policy in EU, and not only like pan-European, but national cultural strategies and cultural policies, because it's important not only be united in Europe, but also to be diverse. And that's our wealth, that's our strength, to be diverse but united. And that's also, an issue in Ukraine, because we also have not only Ukrainian repertoire, we have Crimean Tatars, we have Greek in Azov, in Mariupol, we have, Hungarian, we have Polish people, we have Jewish minorities, so many people are living in Ukraine and peacefully coexisting here and living together and building our common future.
We then turn to opera and why it's such a powerful way to tell Ukraine's story to the world, a story that must not be forgotten.
Opera, it's a great thing to tell stories, and always been like great instrument for telling the stories. And for Ukraine, it's now very important, though opera is very long, preparing process. Because, for instance, with Metropolitan, I've mentioned to you that we've discussed with them, with Peter Gelb in April 2022, creation of Ukrainian opera. So they've chosen a Ukrainian composer, and commissioned an opera, and libretto was written by George Brandt, American librettist, and music is now created, as we speak, created by Maxim Kolomiyets, Ukrainian composer. And this is a story of mothers of Kherson, of women who were visiting Russia or occupied territories to bring their children back. And that's a way how to document this war, not to be, disappearing in a couple of years when, the war will be over and ceasefire will come and everybody will forget about this war. But these stories should live in order to be like signs of not repeating these things in the world. Of course, I can understand that we had First World War, Second World War, and nobody believed that this type of war could happen in Europe in 21st century. Unfortunately, it happened. So we need to have tracking records of this to prevent its happening in future, and to have this voice of Ukraine in this, because otherwise Russia will create their stories.
As our conversation went on, Galyna described what daily life is like for artists and ordinary citizens, balancing constant danger with the need to keep working, creating, and living.
When you're, sleeping in the night and hear an air alarm, you should go to the shelter. And then in the morning, you are having a coffee, go into your rehearsal. And then again, air alarm, you should go to the shelter and continue rehearsing the music, And in the evening, you are on stage. Again, it could be alarm. And, you've got some news from the front lines, from your relatives or your friends, unfortunately. Someone could be killed, and you need to live through. You need, to bear this memory and to remember them. And in memory of them, you should continue to work, to create, and to be proud of this country, and to continue be alive. That's very important. And I'm sure that Ukraine will be great soil for many artists after at least ceasefire, if not end of the war, but at least ceasefire, when a lot of people will be allowed to come here. For artists, I think it's sometimes level of emotions, impressions, the level of human empathy. It's a forgotten thing sometimes in Europe, in calm situation, when nothing is happening and nothing is troubling you. And here, the very human emotions are on the top. And the very, sometimes people are asking, why you're so resilient? We have no other option. Either we continue, or we just stop living, and there is no sense of continuing living here. For us, it's not a question of choice, honestly. We need to continue, and sometimes we have this black humor joke that after the hard nights of shellings and attacks, etc., etc. In the morning, everybody is, looking in the chat and working chat. Do we need to go on time? Yes, you should. And the only excuse you have, if you have been killed yesterday. Otherwise, you should go to work, So that's the way we are living. So we need to be alive, to be active, and despite everything, to show our children that way how we live. We need to protect, we need to live for them, and we need to show, to demonstrate them that it's worth living here. Not going out of this country, but continue to live here and to plan their future here.
Listening to Galyna, I was struck by how closely culture and survival are linked in Ukraine today. Art here isn't just about performances or exhibitions. It's about resilience, about refusing to surrender, and about building a future worth defending. And one day, when the war is over, Ukraine's artists will have so many stories to tell through music, opera, and their own voices. This was an excerpt, Andrii's prayer, from the 1863 comical opera Zaporozhets za Dunajem, the Zaporozhian Beyond the Danube, sometimes referred to in English also as The Cossacks in Exile, by the Ukrainian composer Semen Hulak-Artemovsky. It is the first opera my next guest ever came in contact with as a child. Meanwhile, Bogdan Strutynsky is the director of the National Operetta of Ukraine, which offers a wide repertoire ranging from stage performances of Bach's Coffee Cantata to musicals like Chicago or Tiger Hunters, which you can watch on OperaVision. When people think of opera in Ukraine, they might imagine something fairly new or fragile. But as we have already seen, Ukraine has a very deep theatrical tradition. Could you tell us a little more about those roots?
Український музично-драматичний театр є дуже багато.
The Ukrainian musical theatre tradition is incredibly rich. It grew out of a remarkable history of creativity and resistance. You already showed how in the late 19th century, Tsarist Russia actually forbade the existence of a Ukrainian theatre. There could be only Russian theatre. No permanent Ukrainian stages, only traveling troops. Yet, a whole constellation of artists, Sadovsky, Staritsky, the Tobilevich family, Kropivnitsky, and the great Maria Zankovetska, built a national theatre anyway, performing wherever they could. The building we're sitting in now, the National Opera of Ukraine, was completed in 1902, and just a few years later, in 1907, Sadovsky and Zankovetska opened the very first stationary Ukrainian theatre here in Kyiv. Even Konstantin Stanislavski, the founder of the famous Moscow Art Theatre, admired these Ukrainian artists. He invited Maria Zankovetska to Moscow to perform in Chekhov's The Sibyl. That shows how highly he valued her artistry, even if in the end the role went to Chekhov's wife. This history matters because for too long Soviet ideology erased the distinctions between Ukraine and Russia until all that survived was declared Russian. But we have always had our own culture, language and mentality, our own voice. We create and build. We do not destroy.
Розумієте, ми створюємо, а не руйнуємо.
And today that tradition lives on in the National Operetta, which you lead. What was it like for your theatre when the war began, and how have you managed to keep going since then?
The
war changed everything overnight. There were nights of bombardment when our artists, like all workers all over Ukraine, came to work exhausted, having spent hours in shelters. We didn't know if there would even be an audience. We had just finished a major restoration of our theatre and barely reopened to the public few months before the Russian bombardments. Could all that hard work have been in vain? But when we opened our doors, the halls were full. People came because they needed music, beauty, and a sense of normal life. That gave us strength, and we adapted quickly. We changed our repertoire, shortened performances to fit around curfews, and even performed in our foyer by candlelight when the power was out. Our singers, dancers, and musicians have been incredibly brave. They keep coming no matter how little sleep that nightly terror of Russian attacks leaves them with. For us, this is not just entertainment, it is part of national resilience, a way to hold the line culturally where the army holds the line physically. You've spoken before about how Ukraine is sometimes misunderstood abroad, especially when it comes to its cultural heritage. What do you wish opera audiences and institutions in the West understood better?
Я б хотів простої правди.
I want them to see the truth. For centuries, empires, first Tsarist Russia, later the Soviet Union, claimed Ukrainian culture as their own. Take Tchaikovsky, for example. His ancestors were Cossacks from Kremenchuk. He wrote many of his greatest works on his sister's estate in Ukraine. Two of his operas deal with Ukrainian subjects. Ukrainian folklore influenced his work far beyond the second, so-called Ukrainian symphony. Yet the world thinks of him only as Russian. Unlike Russia, we are not trying to claim what isn't ours, but we do ask the world to stop letting Russia rewrite history, to see Ukraine as a separate, vibrant culture with its own voice. And most of all, we need opportunities to work together, not just charity. Co-productions, shared festivals, training exchanges, these are the things that will keep Ukrainian opera alive and connected to the world. Ukraine should not only be seen through the lens of war, it must also be seen in art as part of the European cultural family. You also work closely with young artists. Given everything they've been through, first the pandemic, now the war, what do you tell them? I tell them, above all, to believe in themselves. They must keep searching, learning, growing, because when they sing or act on stage, they are ambassadors of Ukraine. Music crosses borders. Artists cross borders. Many of our listeners will recognize Ukrainian singers like Lyudmila Monastyrska, Andriy Kulmach, who won Cardiff Singer of the World in 2018, Olga Kulchinska, Bogdan Volkov, Andriy Bondarenko, Valentin Dikyuk, and so many others who represent their country in the most important opera houses and festivals of the world. Even if they sing in Italian, French, or German, they carry Ukraine's voice to the world. Bogdan, thank you so much for sharing this perspective and for the work you and your company continue to do during these incredibly difficult times. I thank today's guests, Anna Gadetzka, Grygorenko, Bogdan Strutynsky, and Vasyl Vovkun, for so generously sharing their insights. I hope you will join me again for our next episode, but I must not forget to invite you to also have a look at the interesting contributions from opera houses across Europe made available to you on operavision.eu. This series is curated, edited, and presented by me, Sebastian Schwarz. OperaVision is supported by the Creative Europe program of the European Union in the framework of the Opera Europa Next Generation platform. Until next time, keep singing, keep questioning, and take care.
Що полі на край дороги, зозулько, зозулько сива, дівко красива, Оленко, Оленко ходить, рожі щіпає, зозулько, зозулько сива, дівко красива, Оленко. Рожі щіпає, кличку ровняє, зозулько, зозулько сива, дівко красива, Оленко. Я така як рожа ця я, зозулько, зозулько сива, дівко красива, Оленко. То пішла би я